My name is Hannah Miller, and the problem with my family did not begin when I bought something without telling them. It began much earlier, long before money or property was involved, back when we all lived in the same house and learned our places without ever saying them out loud. My parents had two daughters. My older sister, Claire, and then me, 4 years later. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Inside the house, everything followed a quiet order that never changed, and I was always placed second. Claire was the child my parents worried about, praised, and protected. I was the child who was expected to adjust. No one announced this rule. It showed itself in small moments that added up over time. When Claire was upset, the house slowed down. When I was upset, I was told to calm myself. When she wanted something, it became a discussion. When I wanted something, it became a lesson about patience. I learned early that my role was not to compete. It was to stay out of the way. At family dinners, my parents asked Claire about her school, her friends, her plans. When they turned to me, it was usually to comment on how quiet I was or how independent I seemed for my age. Independence was never praise. It was an expectation. One memory stayed with me longer than the others. I was 9 when Claire turned 13. My parents filled the house with people, music, and decorations. They rented chairs, ordered food, and invited her friends from school. I remember sitting on the stairs, watching everyone move around her like she was the center of something important. 3 months later, when my birthday came, my mother placed a small cake on the kitchen table before leaving for work. There were no guests, no plans. She kissed my forehead and told me I should be grateful. As we grew older, the difference became more practical. Claire needed help. Claire needed support. Claire needed understanding. I needed to manage. When she forgot things, excuses were made for her. When I forgot things, I was reminded to be more responsible. My parents spoke about fairness often, but fairness always meant giving Claire what she needed and trusting me to accept less. By the time I reached my teenage years, I stopped expecting anything. I focused on school, stayed out late only for work, and learned how to solve problems quietly. When Claire struggled, my parents stepped in. When I struggled, I stepped around it. No one told me to do this. It was simply how things worked. I did not resent my sister openly. I did not argue with my parents. I stored everything away and told myself that one day, distance would fix what words never could. I believed that once I had my own life, my own space, the past would lose its grip on me. I did not yet understand that distance does not matter when people believe they still own your choices. By the time I was 16, the pattern in my family was no longer subtle. It had hardened into something fixed, something no one questioned anymore. Claire's problems were treated as emergencies. Mine were treated as inconveniences. If she argued with my parents, they blamed stress. If I argued, they blamed attitude. I learned quickly that silence kept the peace, even when it cost me. When college applications came up, the difference became sharper. Claire was unsure what she wanted to do, and my parents gave her time. They paid for tutoring, test prep, and private counseling sessions to help her find her path. When I brought up my own plans, my father nodded and said it was good that I already knew what I wanted. That was the end of the conversation. Claire chose a college close to home. My parents rented her an apartment so she would not feel uncomfortable in dorms. They furnished it, paid the bills, and visited often. When it was my turn, I suggested staying with her to save money. Claire looked at me and said I could, but only if I paid rent. My parents agreed with her without hesitation. They said it was fair and would teach me responsibility. I moved into a crowded dorm instead and took a part-time job to cover the cost. During those years, my life shrank to schedules and numbers. Classes in the morning, work in the afternoon, studying late into the night. I skipped meals to save money and bought used books when I could find them. Claire visited home every weekend. I went when I could afford the gas. When my car broke down, I handled it alone. When hers did, my parents drove out immediately and paid for repairs. Phone calls from home followed the same rhythm. My mother asked if I was managing, not if I was okay. When I said yes, the call ended quickly. If I mentioned being tired, she reminded me that struggle builds character. Then she would tell me how stressed Claire was and how hard things were for her. After graduation, I returned home briefly before finding work. Claire had already married by then. Her husband moved in with her, and my parents helped them buy a house. I slept in my childhood room for 3 months, saving every dollar I earned. No one asked how long I planned to stay. It was understood that I would leave soon. When I finally moved out, I did not announce it as an achievement. I treated it like a quiet escape. I rented a small place, kept my address to myself, and focused on work. I told myself that this was the point where my life would separate cleanly from my family's expectations. I was wrong. The distance did not make them less involved. It only changed the way they reached for control. And the first sign came when I stopped being just the younger daughter and became someone with something they wanted. After I moved out, I built my life carefully and quietly. I worked long hours, avoided unnecessary expenses, and kept my plans to myself. My apartment was small, but it was mine. I paid the rent on time, cooked my own meals, and learned how to live without asking anyone for help. For the first time, my choices belonged only to me. My parents called less often once I stopped needing them. When they did call, the conversation always circled back to Claire. Her husband could not keep a stable job. The kids were growing fast. Expenses were rising. My mother spoke as if she were reporting weather conditions, not warning me. I listened, responded politely, and said nothing more. Over time, my savings grew, slowly, steadily, without excitement. I did not talk about it. I did not celebrate it. I treated money like something fragile that could disappear if noticed. Every month, I transferred a fixed amount into a separate account and pretended it did not exist. It was during this period that I made a decision I did not share with anyone. I did not announce it. I did not seek advice. I began planning for something permanent, not an upgrade, not a luxury, a boundary, something that could not be taken away by opinion or pressure. I researched quietly, late at night, after work. I looked outside the city, far enough to avoid surprise visits, close enough to remain practical. I learned the process, the risks, the numbers. I calculated everything twice, then 3 times. I told myself that if anything felt uncertain, I would stop. Nothing did. The moment I realized I could actually do it, something shifted inside me. Not excitement, not joy, something sharper. A sense that I needed to move fast before anyone found out. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Claire. I did not even tell my closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the safer it felt. That safety did not last. One afternoon at work, I opened an email I thought was private. A coworker noticed the subject line and asked a casual question. I brushed it off and changed the screen. I assumed that was the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, my mother called. Her tone was light, almost cheerful. She asked why I had not told her I was looking at houses. I felt my chest tighten. I denied it, said nothing was decided. She laughed and said she was only thinking ahead. Then she said something that made everything clear. "You need to think bigger," she told me. "If you're buying, it should be something that works for the whole family." That was the moment I understood. Whatever I was building was already being measured, divided, and claimed in their minds. And I had not even signed anything yet. I ended the call politely. Then I sat still for a long time, staring at the wall, realizing that time was no longer on my side. If I hesitated now, I would lose it before it ever became mine. After that call, the pressure began quietly, then all at once. My mother started sending messages with links attached. At first, it was 1 or 2 houses, always larger than what I had planned. 4 bedrooms, big yard, close to good schools. She did not ask what I wanted. She spoke as if a decision had already been made and I was only late to accept it. When I did not reply, she called. She said she was only trying to help. She said Claire's children needed space. She said it would be smart to think ahead. I listened without agreeing. I gave short answers and ended the calls early. That only made things worse. Claire contacted me next. Her tone was calm, confident, and direct. She told me which areas were best. She told me which layouts would work. She told me her husband needed an office and the kids needed their own rooms. She spoke as if she were planning a move, not giving advice. At no point did she ask whether I was comfortable with any of it. I stopped answering her messages. At work, the atmosphere changed. People asked questions they had no reason to ask. They congratulated me on things I had never confirmed. Someone mentioned that my coworker had been talking about me buying a place. I realized then that what I thought was a small slip had turned into a story that was no longer under my control. That night, my parents called together. My father spoke this time. He said buying property was a family matter. He said mistakes were expensive and guidance was necessary. He said I should not rush into anything alone. I told him I was still deciding. He said decisions like that should not be made in isolation. I hung up and knew I could not wait anymore. The next morning, I called my agent and told her I was ready. I submitted the paperwork, finalized the numbers, and scheduled the signing. I did not feel relieved. I felt alert, like someone moving before a door closed. I signed everything without telling my family. For 2 days, there was silence. Then my mother called again, excited. She said Claire had found the perfect place and wanted to show it to me. I told her calmly that I had already bought something. The line went quiet. She asked where it was. I told her the location but nothing else. She asked how many rooms. I said it was enough for me. She did not respond right away. When she did, her voice was tight. She said I had acted without thinking. She said I had embarrassed them by excluding them. She said Claire was very upset. That evening, Claire sent a single message. "You didn't seriously buy without us, did you?" I did not answer. The next day, I drove to the house alone. I stood inside it, keys in my hand, knowing that whatever peace I felt would not last, because now they knew it existed. And once they knew, they would not stop until they decided what it was meant for. For the first few days after I got the keys, I told myself I would wait before telling anyone else. I wanted time to settle, to think, to breathe. That time never came. My parents began calling again, not to ask questions, but to correct what they believed I had done wrong. My mother said the location was inconvenient. She said Claire would have trouble bringing the kids that far. My father said a 2-bedroom place was a waste. He said property should be chosen with long-term family needs in mind. Neither of them asked why I chose it. Neither of them asked how I felt. Claire stopped pretending altogether. She sent messages listing problems with my decision. Too small, too far, poor planning. She told me I should reconsider before it was too late. When I did not respond, she sent another message telling me she had already spoken to our parents about solutions. That was when I felt something change. It was no longer frustration. It was urgency. I drove to the house every evening after work. I checked the doors, the windows, the mailbox. I kept the curtains closed. I had not invited anyone inside, not even friends. It felt important that the space remain untouched, like proof that it was still mine. One afternoon, my mother called and said she wanted to visit. She said she was nearby. I told her I was busy. She laughed and said she only wanted to see the place. I said no. She paused, then said she understood. The next day, my father asked for the address again. I told him I had already sent it. He said he could not find it. I did not resend it. That night, Claire called. She sounded annoyed. She asked why I was being secretive. She said family members did not hide things from each other. She said trust worked both ways. I told her the house was not a group decision. She said that was exactly the problem. 2 days later, I came home from work and noticed something odd. The front gate was slightly open. I was certain I had closed it that morning. I told myself it was nothing. Wind, a mistake. Still, I checked every room before I sat down. Nothing was missing. The following morning, I found a message from my mother asking why my doorbell camera was offline. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying that I did not know what she was talking about. She responded with a single sentence. "Oh, I thought it was broken." That was when I understood something important. They were not waiting for permission. They were already testing access. After that message, I stopped assuming anything was accidental. I changed my routine without telling anyone. I arrived at the house at different times. I parked a street away. I checked the locks every night. Nothing happened for 2 days, and the silence made everything worse. On the 3rd day, my neighbor knocked on my door. She asked if my family was moving in. I asked what she meant. She said a woman had come by earlier with 2 children, pointing at the house and talking loudly on the phone. She said the woman sounded certain, like the place already belonged to her. I thanked her and closed the door without explaining. That evening, my mother called again. She asked when I planned to come by for dinner. I said I was busy. She sighed and said everyone was worried about me. She said Claire had been stressed because of housing issues and that I should be more understanding. I said nothing. She filled the silence by reminding me that family helped family. The next morning, I found something in my mailbox that did not belong there. It was a flyer from a local moving company, addressed to Claire, with my house number written in pen. I stood on the porch holding it, feeling the ground shift under my feet. I had never given that address to her. I checked my phone, missed calls, 3 from my mother, 2 from Claire. I did not return them. That night, I stayed inside and kept the lights off. I told myself I was overreacting. Then, just before midnight, my doorbell rang. I did not move. A few seconds later it rang again, then a knock, slow, firm, familiar. I checked the camera feed on my phone. Claire stood at the door with her husband behind her. The kids were in the car. She was smiling, like this was a visit she had planned in advance. I did not answer. A message appeared on my phone. "We're outside, open up." I did not reply. After several minutes, they left. I watched their car disappear down the street and locked the door again, even though it was already locked. The next day, I called a locksmith and scheduled a full lock change. I did not tell my family. I did not explain myself. I told the locksmith to work quickly and quietly. That evening, my mother called angry. She said her key no longer worked. She asked why. I told her calmly that I had changed the locks. She said I had overstepped. She said I was being dramatic. She said she only wanted to help Claire settle temporarily. That word stayed with me. Temporarily. Because I knew from experience that nothing in my family was ever temporary. After I changed the locks, the calls became sharper. My mother no longer tried to sound calm. She said I was shutting them out. She said Claire was hurt. She said I was acting like a stranger. I listened without responding and ended the calls quickly. I knew if I explained myself, it would only give them something to argue against. 2 days passed without incident. Then, on a weekday afternoon, I left work early to pick up groceries. When I turned onto my street, I saw a car parked in front of my house that did not belong there. My chest tightened before I even stopped the engine. Claire's car was in my driveway. I parked across the street and watched. The front door was closed, but the porch light was on. I knew I had turned it off that morning. I walked toward the house slowly, every step heavy. As I reached the gate, I heard voices inside. I unlocked the door and stepped in. Claire was standing in my living room with my mother. Boxes were stacked near the wall, not packed boxes, empty ones, like preparation. My mother turned first. She looked startled, then annoyed. Claire looked relieved, as if I had arrived late to something already decided. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My mother answered before Claire could. She said the old key did not work, so they brought a locksmith. She said it was a misunderstanding and that they were only checking the place. I looked at the door and saw fresh marks around the lock. Claire crossed her arms. She said I was making things difficult for no reason. She said the house was sitting empty and her family needed space. She said it made sense to start moving things in. I told them to leave. My mother said I was being emotional. Claire said I was overreacting. She said this was a family matter and I was embarrassing everyone by turning it into something bigger. I repeated myself. My mother's face hardened. She said I had no right to treat them like this after everything they had done for me. Claire said if I refused to cooperate, I would regret it. She said people would talk. She said I was tearing the family apart. I walked to the door and opened it. They did not move. I took out my phone and told them I was calling the police. My mother laughed and said I would not dare. Claire said no one would take me seriously. I pressed the call button anyway. That changed everything. My mother started shouting. Claire told me to hang up. I stayed silent and gave the address. When I ended the call, the house felt smaller. Claire began stuffing the empty boxes back toward the door, muttering under her breath. My mother stared at me like she was seeing someone she did not recognize. When the police arrived, the conversation ended quickly. I showed them the documents. I showed them the lock damage. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain history. I stated facts. They were told to leave. As their car drove away, I locked the door and leaned against it, realizing this was no longer just pressure or guilt. They had crossed into something else. And I knew they would not stop here. The silence after they left did not last long. By the next morning, my phone was full. Missed calls, messages, voicemails I did not open. I went to work anyway, pretending nothing had happened, but the tension followed me there. People whispered when I passed. Someone asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes and kept walking. During lunch, a coworker leaned close and said she had heard something strange. She said someone had been telling people that I was fighting with my family and threatening to throw children out of a house. She said my name was being mentioned carefully, like a rumor that wanted to sound true. I knew immediately where it had come from. That evening, my mother posted online. She did not name me, but she did not have to. She wrote about a daughter who forgot where she came from. She wrote about children being denied shelter. She wrote about how money changed people. The post spread fast. Relatives commented. Friends shared it. Some sent me messages asking why I was being so cold. Claire followed with her own version, photos of her kids, a caption about instability and betrayal. People responded with sympathy and anger. None of them asked me what happened. I blocked accounts, muted numbers, and shut everything down. Still, it found its way in. A distant cousin called to lecture me. An old friend asked if I had really called the police on my own family. At work, the looks became heavier. I felt watched. 2 days later, something else happened. I noticed I had not received any mail from my bank in weeks. I logged into my account and saw an address change notification. My correspondence had been redirected to my parents' house. I called immediately. The representative explained that someone claiming to be my mother had confirmed personal details and requested the update. It took hours to reverse it. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. That night, I checked the security footage. I watched my mother standing at the edge of my driveway earlier that day, on the phone, pacing slowly. She never rang the bell. She never knocked. She left after 10 minutes. The next morning, I received a notice from the neighborhood association. A complaint had been filed against my property. It accused me of using the house for unauthorized activity. I read it twice, then laughed once, sharp and hollow. This was no longer emotional pressure. It was interference. I gathered everything: screenshots, messages, call logs, the locksmith invoice, the police report. I placed it all in a folder and kept it with me. That night, I listened to a voicemail I had avoided all day. My father's voice filled the room. He said I thought I had one. He said I was mistaken. He said I could not hide forever. I saved the message. And for the first time, I stopped waiting for things to calm down. I started preparing for what was coming next. I stopped trying to live normally after that voicemail. I still went to work. I still paid my bills, but everything else became secondary to watching for the next move. I knew my family well enough to understand that silence from them did not mean retreat. It meant planning. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I did not answer. A minute later, a message arrived. It was from a lawyer's office. The subject line said family property concern. My pulse spiked. I opened it carefully. The message claimed there was a misunderstanding regarding my house. It said my parents believed there had been a verbal agreement about shared use. It suggested mediation before the situation became unpleasant. I read it 3 times. There had never been any agreement. Not verbal, not written, not implied. Yet they were already rewriting the story in official language. I forwarded the email to a lawyer. A friend had recommended and waited. That same evening, Claire sent me a message for the first time since the police incident. It was short and calm, which made it worse. We need to talk in person. This has gone too far. I did not reply. An hour later, my mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail saying the family had decided to hold a meeting. She said everyone would be there. She said it was my chance to explain myself. The word chance sounded like a warning. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. I told myself I would not go. Then I realized that not going would only let them control the story again. If I stayed away, they would speak for me. I booked the time off work and prepared. On Sunday, I walked into the house I grew up in and felt the familiar pressure settle immediately. Relatives were already there. Some avoided my eyes, some stared openly. Claire sat on the couch with her arms crossed. My parents stood near the table like they were hosting a trial. My father began speaking before I sat down. He said the family was deeply hurt. He said my actions had caused embarrassment. He said there were concerns about my stability. My mother added that I had become unrecognizable. Claire said she only wanted safety for her children. I listened without interrupting. Then I placed my folder on the table and opened it. I showed the lock damage photos, the police report, the redirected mail confirmation. The lawyer email. I played my father's voicemail out loud. No commentary, no explanation, just evidence. The room changed. No one spoke for a long moment. My aunt looked down at the papers. A cousin asked quietly if the voicemail was real. My grandmother stared at my parents and said nothing. Claire tried to speak, but my father raised his hand to stop her. I closed the folder and said only one sentence. "This ends now." No one argued. But I could feel it. This was not the end. It was the point where everything broke open. I left the house before anyone could stop me. No one followed. No one called out. That silence stayed with me all the way back to my car, heavy and unfinished. I knew what it meant. They were not defeated. They were regrouping. That night, I received a notification from my bank. A failed attempt to access my account. Someone had entered incorrect security answers multiple times. I changed every password immediately and enabled alerts for everything. Less than an hour later, another alert came in. A credit inquiry request. Blocked. I did not sleep. The next morning, my lawyer called back. He said the email I received had no legal standing. He also said something else that made my stomach tighten. He told me to expect escalation. When people lose control quietly, they often try louder methods. By noon, it started. A coworker forwarded me a link. It was a public post shared widely in local groups. It said a woman had bought a house and abandoned her family. It said children were being denied shelter. It did not use my name, but it used details only my family knew. The comments were vicious. People speculated freely. Some suggested reporting me, others suggested I should be forced to do the right thing. An hour later, my phone rang again, another unknown number. This time I answered. It was the neighborhood association. They said a formal complaint had been filed accusing me of planning to sublet rooms illegally and violate zoning rules. I asked who filed it. They said they could not disclose that information. I already knew. That evening, I found a printed notice taped to my front door. It was not official, but it was designed to look like it was. It warned of consequences if unresolved family matters continued to affect the community. I pulled it down and locked the door behind me. At 9:47 p.m., my mother texted. "You're making this worse than it needs to be." At 9:49, Claire followed. "If you cooperate, this can still be fixed." At 10:02, my father sent one message. "You've forced our hand." I stared at that last line for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and began backing up everything. Messages, footage, emails, call logs. I sent copies to my lawyer and stored the rest externally. I printed documents and placed them in a sealed envelope. Just after midnight, my doorbell rang. I did not answer. I checked the camera. My parents were standing on the porch. With them was a man I did not recognize. He was holding a clipboard. I watched as my father pointed at the door and spoke sharply. The man knocked again, harder this time. I stayed silent. After several minutes, they left. I replayed the footage twice. Then I understood something clearly. They were no longer trying to convince me. They were trying to corner me. And whatever came next would not be quiet. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my door. It had no official seal, only a typed notice inside. It claimed I was unlawfully occupying the property and demanded I contact a representative within 48 hours to resolve ownership concerns. I read it once, then again, slower. The language was vague on purpose. It was meant to scare, not to stand in court. I sent a photo of it to my lawyer immediately. He called back within an hour. His voice was controlled but serious. He said this crossed another line. He said no one could challenge my ownership without legal grounds. He also said something else that stayed with me. He said when people realize they cannot take something, they try to make keeping it unbearable. That afternoon, I came home to find the lock scratched again. This time deeper, deliberate. Someone had tried more than once. I checked the footage. My parents were not there. Claire was not there. It was the same man from the night before, alone, testing the door, stepping back, checking his phone, then leaving. I called the police again. They took photos, they wrote a report. One of them asked if I knew who might be responsible. I said yes. He nodded without comment. That evening, my mother finally called from her own number. I answered. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She spoke slowly, carefully. She said the family was under stress. She said people were watching. She said I needed to stop embarrassing them. She said if I signed a simple agreement allowing shared access, everything would calm down. I told her no. She went quiet for a moment, then she said something that made my chest tighten. If you don't cooperate, we will make sure you regret choosing this house. The call ended. That night I slept with the lights on and my phone beside me. At 2:13 a.m., the motion alert went off. I opened the feed. Someone was standing near the side fence, just out of clear view. They stayed there for several minutes, then walked away. The next morning, my lawyer sent me a draft document. It was a formal cease and desist notice addressed to my parents and to Claire. It detailed unauthorized entry, harassment, interference with financial accounts, and false claims of ownership. It warned of immediate legal action if contact continued. I printed it, I signed it, I sent it. Within hours, my father responded with a single message. "You think paper will protect you?" I did not reply, because I knew now that this was no longer about the house. It was about control. And they were furious that they had lost it. After the cease and desist was delivered, everything went quiet again. No calls, no messages, no strangers at the door. That silence lasted 3 days, and I did not trust a single minute of it. I had learned by now that calm only meant they were choosing a different angle. On the 4th day, my employer called me into a private meeting. My manager looked uncomfortable. He said someone had contacted the company claiming to be a concerned family member. They had questioned my stability and suggested I was involved in a legal dispute that could affect my performance. He asked me directly if there was something the company needed to know. I told him the truth, briefly and clearly. I said there was a personal harassment issue, that legal steps had already been taken, and that it had no connection to my work. I offered documentation if needed. He listened, nodded, and said he would inform HR. I walked out knowing they had crossed into my professional life on purpose. That evening, another problem surfaced. My credit monitoring app sent an alert. Someone had attempted to open a utility account using my name and address. It was denied, but the intent was clear. They were building a paper trail that did not belong to me. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. He called late that night and said we needed to act faster. He advised filing a formal harassment report and requesting a restraining order if the behavior continued. He said the pattern was no longer emotional pressure. It was coordinated interference. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. This one was real. It was from a mediation service requesting my presence for a family property resolution session. The sender was legitimate. The claim was not. My parents had submitted it as if I had agreed. That was the moment something inside me settled. I stopped reacting and started documenting everything with precision. Timestamps, names, copies. I stopped blocking numbers and let messages come through. I let them speak. I let them expose themselves. That night, Claire finally broke the silence. She sent a long message explaining how hard things had been for her, how overwhelmed she felt, how unfair it was that I had space while she struggled. Near the end, the tone shifted. She said if I cared at all, I would stop dragging outsiders into family matters. I did not respond. An hour later, another message arrived. If you don't come to mediation, we'll take this public in ways you can't undo. I stared at the screen, then added the message to my file. Because now I understood their mistake. They believed pressure would make me fold. What they did not realize was that every move they made was tightening the case against them. I did not attend the mediation. Instead, my lawyer sent a formal response stating that no agreement existed, no consent had been given, and all further contact must go through legal channels. Within hours of that letter being delivered, the retaliation began again, faster and louder than before. That evening, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Unknown numbers, private numbers, messages that appeared and disappeared. One voicemail stood out. It was my father. His voice was tight, controlled, and full of certainty. He said I was humiliating the family. He said people were asking questions. He said if I did not show up and fix this, he would make sure everyone knew the kind of person I really was. The next morning, I found out what he meant. A post had been shared in multiple community groups. It used my full name this time. It accused me of stealing family assets and abandoning relatives in need. It claimed legal action was already underway and warned others to be careful around me. The comments exploded. Some were cruel, some were threatening. A few mentioned my workplace. I took screenshots and reported the posts. Some were removed, others stayed up long enough to do damage. By noon, HR called me in again. They said complaints had been emailed anonymously. They said the language was aggressive and personal. They said they understood it appeared to be harassment, but they needed reassurance that it would not escalate further. I handed them copies of the cease and desist and police reports. They accepted them, but I could feel the shift. Doubt had entered the room. That afternoon, I received a message from someone I did not know. It was a link. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a fundraising page. The title said the family had been displaced and needed help securing housing for 2 children. Photos of Claire's kids were displayed. In the description, it claimed I had promised help and then disappeared. It mentioned a house sitting empty while children suffered. One of the photos showed my front porch. I contacted the platform immediately. I sent proof of ownership, police reports, and the cease and desist. I did not wait. Within hours, the page was taken down, but screenshots had already spread. That night, someone knocked on my door again. When I checked the camera, it was not my family. It was a man holding papers, looking confused. He said he was there about the house. He said he had been told the owner wanted to sell quickly. I told him through the intercom that he had been misled and asked him to leave. He apologized and walked away. I locked the door and stood still for a long time. This was no longer chaos. It was strategy. And they were willing to burn everything around me to force my hand. After the fundraising page was removed, I expected another pause. Instead, things accelerated. The next morning, I received an email from a real estate office I had never contacted. They thanked me for my interest and asked when I would like to list my property. The message included details only someone with access to my address and layout would know. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment. By afternoon, a second inquiry arrived, then a third. Different agencies, same assumption, that I was preparing to sell. Someone was feeding them information deliberately, creating the appearance that the house was already slipping out of my control. That evening, my father left another voicemail. This one was shorter. He said I was making things difficult for no reason. He said the house could still serve its purpose. He said the longer I dragged this out, the worse it would look for me. He ended by saying that people were starting to ask why I was so defensive if I had nothing to hide. I did not respond. Instead, I drove to the police station with my folder and asked to update the report. I added the forged notices, the fake listings, the fundraising page, and the attempted account activity. The officer listened carefully and told me something I had already suspected. This was no longer isolated behavior. It showed intent. That night, I received a text from Claire. "You're forcing us to protect ourselves." An hour later, another message followed. "If the house becomes a problem for you, none of this has to continue." I read both messages slowly, then I added them to the file. The next morning, my lawyer called early. He said we were ready to escalate. He said the evidence showed a clear pattern of harassment, impersonation, and attempted fraud. He said the court would not ignore it. By midday, my parents were served with formal legal notice. So was Claire. Within an hour of delivery, my phone rang. I did not answer. Messages poured in. Anger, denial, accusations. My mother said I had gone too far. My father said I had chosen strangers over blood. Claire said I was destroying her family. I let every message arrive. That evening, I checked the cameras one last time before sleeping. No movement, no shadows, no cars slowing down. But I knew better than to relax. Because when people realize they are losing, they stop trying to scare you. They try one final move to force an ending on their terms. The final move did not come loudly. It came disguised as something reasonable. 2 days after the legal notices were delivered, my grandmother called me. She had never been part of the pressure before. Her voice was tired, careful. She said the family wanted peace. She said everyone was exhausted. She asked me to come to one last meeting so things could be settled quietly, without courts and outsiders. I did not answer immediately. I asked who would be there. She said my parents, Claire, and a few relatives. No lawyers, just family. That detail told me everything. I agreed to attend, but only after my lawyer advised me exactly what to do. He told me to go, to say very little, and to let them speak first. He said people who believe they are losing often reveal more than they intend. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon. When I arrived, the atmosphere was controlled, almost polite. My parents greeted me stiffly. Claire avoided my eyes. Relatives sat quietly, watching. My father opened the discussion by saying everyone had made mistakes. He said emotions had run high. He said the family needed to move forward. Then he made the offer. He said if I transferred partial ownership of the house into a family trust, everything would stop. No more posts, no more complaints. No more interference. Claire would have guaranteed housing, and I would still technically own my home. He framed it as a compromise. I said nothing. Claire spoke next. She said the legal route would ruin everyone. She said judges would not care about feelings. She said if this went to court, private matters would become public records. She said my reputation would suffer. That was the threat. My mother added that people already saw me differently. She said the damage had been done and could only be softened, not erased. She said I needed to think carefully about how much more I wanted to lose. I opened my bag and placed my phone on the table. I told them I had recorded every interaction since the harassment began. I told them the trust proposal, combined with previous actions, would strengthen the case against them. I told them this meeting was being documented. No one spoke. Then my father said something he could not take back. He said the house had never really been mine in their eyes. He said families did not operate on ownership, only obligation. He said I owed them for raising me, and this was the least I could do. The room went quiet. I ended the meeting by standing up and saying I would not negotiate under pressure. I told them all future communication would go through my lawyer. I walked out without waiting for a response. That night, my lawyer called. I told him exactly what had been said. He was silent for a moment, then said one sentence. That admission changes everything. For the first time, I realized the end was no longer in their control. It was in mine. The week after that meeting moved faster than everything before it. My lawyer filed the motion the next morning. It included the recordings, the messages, the fake listings, the impersonation attempts, and my father's statement about ownership and obligation. It was no longer framed as a family dispute. It was framed as coercion. 3 days later, my parents were formally notified that a restraining order was being requested. Claire was included. The language was precise. No contact, no third parties, no indirect communication, no presence near my home or workplace. That afternoon, my mother broke the silence. She sent a long message saying she did not recognize me anymore. She said I had become cruel. She said I was tearing the family apart for a piece of property. She said the court would see through my lies. She ended the message by saying I would regret humiliating them like this. I did not reply. An hour later, Claire sent a message that was very different in tone. She said she was scared. She said she had not expected things to go this far. She said our parents had handled everything and she had only followed along. She asked if there was still a way to fix this privately. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. 2 days later, the temporary restraining order was granted. The first violation happened within 24 hours. My father showed up at my workplace. Security called me down. He was standing in the lobby, calm, holding documents. He told the receptionist he was there to speak to his daughter. He said it was urgent. When I refused to come down, he raised his voice. He said I was hiding behind lawyers instead of facing my responsibilities. Security escorted him out. The incident was reported immediately. That night, I received a voicemail from an unknown number, my father's voice again. This time, it was angry. He said the court would not save me. He said blood mattered more than paper. He said I was making enemies I could not escape. I saved the message. The next morning, my lawyer filed the violation. By the end of the week, the temporary order was upgraded. No contact meant no contact. That was when the messages stopped. That was when the posts disappeared. That was when the house finally went quiet. But I knew this was not peace. It was containment. And containment only holds until the final outcome is decided. The hearing was scheduled sooner than I expected. 3 weeks. That was all the time between silence and judgment. During that period, nothing happened on the surface. No calls, no visits, no messages slipping through other people. The absence itself felt deliberate, like a held breath. My lawyer warned me not to confuse quiet with surrender. 2 days before the hearing, something finally cracked. Claire contacted my lawyer directly. She claimed she wanted to resolve things and asked if her name could be removed from the case. She said our parents had acted on their own. She said she had only followed instructions and never intended to cause harm. The message was careful, rehearsed, and late. My lawyer replied once, asking for a written statement. She never sent it. The night before the hearing, my mother posted again. This time, the tone was different. No accusations, no anger. She wrote about heartbreak. About losing a daughter. About betrayal that felt worse than grief. She did not name me. She did not need to. Relatives commented with sympathy. Some tagged me. Some asked me to come home and end the madness. I closed the app and slept anyway. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse alone. My parents arrived together. Claire came separately. None of them looked at me. Inside the room, everything moved quickly. The judge reviewed documents, listened to statements, and asked direct questions. When my father was asked whether he believed I owed the family access to my property, he hesitated. Then he answered yes. That answer ended everything. The judge did not raise his voice. He did not react emotionally. He simply noted the statement and moved on. When the ruling came, it was clear and final. The restraining order was made permanent. Harassment was acknowledged. Unauthorized entry was documented. Attempts at coercion were confirmed. No shared ownership, no mediation, no compromise. My parents were instructed to cease all contact immediately. Claire was warned separately. Violations would carry consequences. Outside the courtroom, my mother finally looked at me. Her face was pale. She said nothing. My father stared straight ahead. Claire lingered behind them, unsure where to stand. I did not speak. That afternoon, my lawyer called to confirm the next steps. He said the case had been clean. He said the outcome was strong. He said I had protected myself. That evening, I returned to my house and locked the door. I sat down and listened to the quiet. Not relief, not victory, just finality. The story they had tried to control was no longer theirs. And there was only one thing left to decide. What I would do with the life they no longer had access to. The decision came faster than I expected. 2 days after the hearing, my lawyer called and asked a simple question. He asked whether I planned to stay in the house long term. I did not answer right away. The truth was, the house no longer felt like a beginning. It felt like a line that had already been crossed. That afternoon, I received 3 emails from different real estate agents. All of them said the same thing. They had heard I might be interested in selling. None of them could say who told them. I did not ask, I already knew. I called one agent back and scheduled a meeting. The listing went live quietly. No announcement, no sign on the lawn. Within 48 hours, offers came in, serious ones, one above asking. I accepted it without negotiation. The paperwork moved quickly, almost too easily, like the house itself was ready to be done. My parents did not contact me, they were not allowed to. Claire tried once, through an email address I did not recognize. She said she had not known how far things would go. She said she hoped I was happy. I did not respond. The sale closed 2 weeks later. I signed the final documents without hesitation. When the funds hit my account, I did not feel excitement. I felt clearance, like something heavy had finally been lifted. That same week, my company offered me a transfer. Different state, same role, better terms. I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. The timing felt deliberate, as if everything had been waiting for this exact opening. I packed only what I needed. I did not walk through the house one last time. I did not take photos. I locked the door, handed over the keys, and left without looking back. On the drive out of town, my phone buzzed once. A notification from the court system, confirmation that the case was closed. No pending actions, no appeals filed. That was it. No final confrontation, no apology, no resolution between us. Just distance, formal and enforced. By the time I crossed state lines, the sun had already set. I checked into a hotel, turned off my phone, and sat in silence. Not to reflect, not to grieve, just to exist without interruption. The next morning, I woke up somewhere no one knew my address. And for the first time since this started, nothing followed me. The new city did not announce itself as a fresh start. It revealed itself slowly, through absence. No missed calls. No unexpected emails. No alerts tied to my name. I rented a small place under a short lease and gave the address to no one except my employer. I changed numbers. I redirected mail again, this time permanently. Work absorbed most of my attention. New projects, new expectations, people who knew nothing about my family or what had happened. I kept my life narrow and controlled. Home, office, gym, sleep. The routine left little room for surprise, and that was exactly what I wanted. 3 months passed before the first sign reached me. It came through my lawyer. My parents had requested a modification to the restraining order. They claimed they wanted closure. They said they were willing to apologize. They said the distance had been misunderstood. The request was formal, polite, and late. My lawyer asked if I wanted to respond. I said no. A week later, another request came in. This one from Claire alone. She claimed she had separated from our parents. She said she needed to explain herself. She said everything had gone too far and she had been caught in the middle. I did not answer. Then came the third attempt. My grandmother sent a letter, handwritten. She said she missed me. She said the family felt fractured. She said time was moving faster than any of us expected. She asked me to come home, even briefly. I read the letter once and placed it in a drawer. The court denied the modification request shortly after. No new evidence, no justification, the order stood. That night, I checked the security app on my phone out of habit. There was nothing to check. No cameras, no alerts, no address linked to it anymore. The habit felt strange, like reaching for something that no longer existed. At work, my manager called me into his office. He told me the relocation had been permanent. He said the leadership team was impressed with my performance. He said there were bigger opportunities ahead if I wanted them. I said yes. Later that evening, I went out for a walk, not to clear my head, not to think, just to move. As I crossed the street, my phone vibrated once. A message preview appeared on the screen. Unknown sender. You can't disappear forever. I stopped walking. I did not open it. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to my lawyer, and blocked the number. Then I put the phone away and continued forward without looking back. Because now I understood something clearly. They no longer had access to my life. But they had not stopped watching. And that meant one thing. The story was not finished yet. The message never got a reply. I learned to treat such threats as echoes, loud only if I turned toward them. I blocked the number and reported it. My lawyer handled the follow-up quietly. Still, every small sound around my apartment began to feel like a test. A knock, a phone vibration, a car slowing outside. Each one reminded me how fragile peace could be when people refused to let go. Weeks passed without incident. I worked, slept, kept my world small. Slowly, my body stopped bracing for impact. I started walking home instead of taking a cab. I started buying groceries for the week ahead instead of the day. I even began talking to a neighbor who lived across the hall. Her name was Julia, and she had just moved in too. When she laughed, the sound felt normal, something I had forgotten existed. Then, one evening, as I returned from work, I found a plain envelope under my door. No name, no address, just a folded sheet inside. It wasn't a threat or a demand. It was a photograph. My old house, taken from the street, with lights on inside. The date printed in the corner was recent. I sat down on the floor and stared at it for a long time. Someone wanted me to know they had been there. Someone wanted me to remember that distance didn't erase what had happened. I didn't panic. I placed the photo in an evidence envelope, sealed it, and called my lawyer. He told me to bring it in the next morning. His tone was steady, practiced. This, to him, was another entry in a file. To me, it was proof that endings aren't always clean. After I hung up, I locked the door and turned off the lights. The city outside continued as if nothing had shifted. Cars passed. A siren wailed far away. Life moved forward. I stood by the window and told myself something I hadn't been able to believe before. They could watch, but they could not reach. They could circle, but they could not enter. They had taken everything they could, and still I was here. The next morning, I dropped the envelope off at the law office and went straight to work. By noon, I stopped thinking about it. By evening, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. That was the first real moment of freedom, when I forgot to be afraid. Months later, the house sold again. A new family moved in. I saw the listing online by accident. The walls were repainted, the garden trimmed, the locks replaced. No trace of what had happened. I stared at the pictures until I felt nothing at all. The story that had started with a secret purchase and spiraled into chaos was now just a record, documented, closed, filed. They had lost the one thing they wanted most: control over me. And for the first time since all of it began, the silence that surrounded me wasn't warning. It was peace. You have reached the end of the text.